Hi, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kieran Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
This seat taken.
Hey, Kieran.
Ryan. We're back.
How are you?
Back on the mic. I'm feeling refreshed because I just got back from a trip. And I know you also just got back from a trip.
Yeah, I was on a sort of long road /work /family trip, and I returned.
That's every type of trip that there could be.
Yeah, no, I know. I switched it all into a month, so it was good to be out of the city, but it's nice to be back here at the podcast studio in Brooklyn.
How long were you actually away? Because it felt like a month, like a full month.
It was close to a month, yeah. Between the Quebec trip and then the DC trip and then the Maryland trip, I think a solid month, yeah.
Man, oh man! I mean, so that's what I realize we have pushed a week what our every other week episode schedule. But you know what? I feel okay for it because the two travel podcast hosts were out traveling, and you got to feed the machine. I mean, we don't just sit here and read articles. We got to go out into the world.
Yeah, exactly. No, now that the world is slowly reopening, we have to go be a part of it.
And you mentioned that we're bringing fresh content because we are covering exactly where you just traveled to.
Yeah, exactly. We are talking about Montreal and Quebec City, and we are revisiting these cities that we covered originally in January and February of 2020. Right before the end times.
Exactly right. That's right. Because I had a Quebec City episode, you had a Montreal episode, and I have to ask: did you revisit those episodes before you went on this trip?
I revisited the Quebec City one, but not the Montreal one. But I've revisited both of them prior to this recording. So, I wouldn't make the same jokes essentially again.
So, Ryan, if we have, our loyal listeners out there who go, well, why am I going to listen to this one? I've already covered those old episodes. Surely not that much has changed. Give me the hard sell for why people need to stay tuned.
Well, I think that you did an especially good job, giving the background of Quebec City, and folks should go back and listen to that because you talk a lot about, old Quebec and things like that, which are super cool.
Yeah.
But we're going to go a little bit out of that for this conversation. And then in Montreal, I mean, it's just a city that is constantly evolving. So there's just, more to discuss and more to discover. So, these are sort of like addendums to those episodes. I went back and those are still, there's plenty of great information in there. And folks should visit those. And then, this will give them the latest and greatest of what's happening in each city.
And I like that you're setting a precedent that we can do sequels. So surely that means that I can do another 3-part episode about Boston. Because, things change. Dynamic city very fast.
I don't think things have changed that quickly in Boston.
They just cleaned the John Harvard statue, the famous John Harvard statue. They just cleaned it. Do you know the trademark of what's so unique about that statue?
It's covered in urine.
It is covered in urine, and why that's funny is because all the tourists go and they rub the foot for good luck, right? So the foot has like this big shine on it.
Isn't it not actually John Harvard or something? It's like
there's a whole other story. In fact, we should do a Harvard episode. I was a tour guide there. People would love it. We could do a walking tour of Harvard.
Every episode of this podcast is a Harvard episode.
All right. So the other day I had Charlie out in a stroller, and we were taking a walk through Harvard Yard, and I saw the newly cleaned John Harvard statue, and they cleaned it so well, all the human oils that made the foot shiny are gone. So it just looks like a regular statue again. They ruined that very special part. So everybody needs to go and touch the urine-soaked foot of the John Harvard statue in Cambridge.
And get those oils and other things back on there again.
Exactly. But this is not the Harvard Guide episode. This is the Montreal and Quebec City Guide. Ryan, I can see from the outline here. That's right, everybody. Ryan did preparation for this episode. So I see how packed it is. I think it's time to take off.
Yeah, I think we should call the flight attendants.
Flight attendants, prepare for takeoff, please.
All right, Ryan, we're here in the air. We're coming down into Quebec City. Does Quebec have an airport?
It does, but I drove. So
okay, sure.
So when you went to Quebec City, it was in the winter. So it's interesting listening to you talk about how cold it was. You talk about going out into snowshoeing and all sorts of things that are very wintry. But my trip to Quebec City, it was warm. I mean, and because it's this year, it's unseasonably warm. It's unseasonably warm everywhere. So it was definitely unseasonably warm in Quebec. But so it was interesting to see it sort of in that context because, when you think of Quebec City, at least when I do, it is cold there. But
and it's such a cozy city. Like I loved it in the winter. I think I really recommend visiting it in the winter. So I'm curious to hear, do you recommend it as a summer city?
I think it certainly works as a summer city. In the very first night in town, we drove downtown to near Old Quebec and we parked and it was, about to be sunset and we were sort of near the Plains of Abraham. And you talk about the Plains of Abraham in your episode. It's a pretty epic park that sort of sits on top of Quebec City where a famous battle was fought. But we were actually pointed towards a little section of that park, which is sort of all the way near the tip, near the St. Lawrence River. And this little sort of terrace area, you can actually look see the sort of entire old city, including that amazing hotel, which is so beautiful. And so it's actually sort of a lovely little spot to sort of either start or end your sort of walking tour of Quebec City, because you get to see everything you're about to see or everything that you just saw sort of from the top. Did you make it up to that little section?
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah, so I want to post a picture from there on the Instagram, and I actually will post it, I promise, because that was sort of a great recommendation that we were able to sort of run up there right before the sunset and get that great photo. So, folks should definitely spend time down around the Plains of Abraham, down around Old Quebec, because there's a lot to see and just a lot of little shops, and it's a really fun place to spend time.
Well, and you're giving a good sense of there's a lot of up and down in Quebec, right? You're climbing hills, you're taking in views, you're going down low. And one of the most useful ways to get around is a signature Quebec City funicular ride. So, Ryan, and I'm a big fan of the funicular. We're still working on that best funiculars in the world episode that I've promised since episode 1, I think. And so I got to ask you, I know that you always tell me that you will ride a funicular when you come upon one. You have yet to actually deliver on that. Did you ride the funicular?
I tried. We went and we had just missed it. We just missed it. But I have to tell you, it doesn't seem that functional. Like it's not that hard to get up to the old town, up the, what do they call it, the breakneck stairs.
Yep. Because they're more breakneck in the winter, for what it's worth. But I would think in that heat, you must have been a sweaty ball of mess.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So I didn't. It's a lovely looking funicular. I didn't get a chance to go on it, but I did enjoy walking around that entire area, seeing that old cathedral. It feels very old world. Even more. I mean, when you talk about how the city is a fort. I mean, to get to downtown, you actually have to, drive through or walk through an actual fort entrance, right? I mean, it really feels like a fortified city still, which, Montreal was also sort of fortified at one point, but, it does not feel anything like that when you're there now.
No. But for what it's worth, I do think the U.S. military probably could take it if we had to.
Quebec City?
Yeah. That wall is not as intimidating as maybe it once was.
No, I think it used to be far more intimidating than it is now. But also right near the Plains of Abraham, did you have a chance to go to the National Museum there in Quebec?
No, we did not go there.
So they have a pretty large museum. I was impressed by it. It's one of those things where it's sort of multiple buildings that have one that was clearly built for the museum. They have a lot of contemporary art. They have a huge collection of Quebec art. But one of the things that I thought was really cool is one of the buildings used to be a jailhouse that's been turned into a museum. And,
that's right up our alley.
Yeah, we've talked about this, right?
Absolutely. It's a very confusingly named episode called In the Jailhouse Now.
In the Jailhouse Now. That's a classic episode.
Classic. We were still getting our legs under ourselves.
Yeah, well, I think this would have been a great example of one of those buildings, right? Because the museum itself, there was actually a big Picasso exhibit that's touring that was there, but they have a very large permanent exhibit that spans these multiple buildings. So, we were there for 2 hours, and I think saw a good amount of what was there, but missed a lot of the deep sort of Quebec art. So, if you're a fan of art museums and it is extremely cold outside or extremely hot, this is definitely an inside activity that you can do in Quebec. And they have these like later, they have to open till 9 on a couple nights. So check out the website because it seems to float around. But we went on like a Thursday evening at 7 and it wasn't too crowded at all. So it's a good thing to do in an evening or when you have some time to kill.
And any, standout works that people definitely have to see, or do you recommend it as wander and, take in the ambiance?
Yeah, they had a really interesting they had recreated one of these big refugee camps. And in miniature, and they actually built it. I know.
I was intrigued until you threw in the miniature stuff.
But they actually built it sort of in one of the jailhouse, in one of the little jail cells. So when you walk by, it actually goes day to night. So you see the settlement sort of in the nighttime, and then the lights come up in it. It's a pretty powerful exhibit. I mean, it kind of gives you it's tied into this documentary that came out. So seems to be sort of a traveling exhibit, but the museum's really well curated. There's a lot of space and a lot of stuff, and you get to spend a lot more time with Quebec art than you would imagine. Have you seen the episode of Parts Unknown where Anthony Bourdain goes to Quebec?
Oui, of course. Any episode of Parts Unknown, the answer is yes. I have seen it.
So
the travel god, Anthony Bourdain.
Exactly. He split his time in that episode between Quebec City and Montreal.
Indeed. I assume he took that from you.
Yeah. Well, this is sort of patterned after that. But they go out to eat at this one restaurant called Le Continental.
I remember it.
And it's, it is still open, made it through COVID. And it's really old world. I mean, it sort of feels like what it must have felt like to eat on the Titanic. You've got these folks in like their, all white uniforms who are preparing the food in, silver plates and everything right next to you during the meal. It's very out of time, very Gilded Age. And it's been, the restaurant's been around for like 45 years. So you get the feeling they have not changed the menu much. And you can get a lot of like, items that are sort of fallen out of favor, but are extraordinarily, these very rich French dishes, very Quebec, and especially on a cold day, I can see going into La Continental and having this kind of old world feast would warm you up.
And did you what old classic dish did you enjoy there?
I just got, oh my gosh, I put on like 10 pounds on this trip. Let me tell you, because you do a lot of walking in Quebec City. And to your point, it's a lot of walking up and down. So you get a lot of steps in. But boy, does the richness of the food, more than make up for it. So, we had, I think we split 2 different kinds of steaks and some silly appetizers. It was it was very decadent. And to have the server actually prepare it in front of you is, unique to this place. And, we just watched the Parts Unknown, literally that day before we went out to dinner. And the restaurant looked exactly the same as in the series when he filmed it like 8 or 9 years ago. Yeah. So these things
like that sort of place.
Yeah, it is certainly that sort of place. So Quebec City, you and I talked about this. Quebec City is more of a tourist town than Montreal, which is more of like a town where things are happening, right? Mm-hmm. But Quebec seems like it's more paused. Like, you could go to Quebec City like every 5 or 6 years, and there wouldn't be like an amazing amount of new stuff to do. But they've continually like refined the stuff that's already going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
But I did.
I think that gives it kind of a timeless quality, which is
absolutely. Well, everything about exactly. No, everything about like the timelessness is what sort of surprised me. It felt even more out of time than Montreal, which I thought was going to be the most European place I'd ever been in North America. But no, it's Quebec City is definitely that. Well, there's some other good restaurants that are sort of post-date that Anthony Bourdain special, and two of them I want to talk about because they had natural wine.
Oh, God. It's so, you do have a style of travel, don't you?
I really do. So first thing I should recommend to people is this is definitely a reservation city, and unfortunately they're not really on Resi or Open Table. They all have their own sort of reservation systems, so you got to go and do it directly on the restaurant's website or call the restaurant up directly. But there isn't like a one-stop restaurant reservation shop like there would be in a lot of cities. So that's something that folks should be aware of if they want to go to any of the places we talk about on either of these episodes. They should most definitely make reservations. So there are two restaurants I want to talk about in particular.
I hope they have French names.
Oh, they have very French names.
Hard to say.
They have very French names, but they also had natural wine. And natural wine, not nearly as plentiful in Quebec City as Montreal, where pretty much you can only drink natural wine. But these two restaurants,
your heaven.
Montreal's one of my heavens, absolutely. So the first one is, and we're going to link to these in the show notes, so don't try to,
don't try to pronounce this at home.
La Renarde et la Chouette.
I think that was actually not so bad, right?
Yeah, I didn't think that sounds so bad either.
And so just for those playing at home, it's LERENARD. ETLACHOUETTE, if you're putting that on your personal Quebec City wish list.
And this is it's a small restaurant in a quieter. It's not an old town. You can walk, but it's like a 15 or 20 minute walk. You get those steps in, and it's got a pretty vegetable forward menu. So it is probably the least meat heavy meal we had in the whole time we were in Quebec. But a fantastic wine pairing, and it felt like a really cute like locals place. It was actually sort of probably the least of the touristy places that we went. You got the feeling that people went and hung out here and spent locals and spent time. So it was a cool place to eat, and if you're looking for something that is not as meat heavy, they have a full sort of tasting menu, or you can do a la carte, but you will leave you will be able to fill up on vegetables and things that are not just like foie gras wrapped in a separate kind of foie gras.
It sounds pretty cool, and I like that you got off the beaten track. And I'm wondering, like, did it feel like, given as you referenced that this is it can feel very European in Quebec City, did this feel like a local bistro?
It wasn't. It was. I mean, it felt like a local natty wine spot. It was pretty low key. We ate outside, and they had a really great porch, and the weather was nice. And you could kind of watch. Half the street was closed off, and there were just people being hipsters and drinking and skateboarding and stuff. So it was a pretty festive atmosphere in that little road. I can't imagine it's like that year round, but it's just a very low key place, and you could even go there and just grab a couple glasses of wine if you had already had a big filling meal at one of the more traditional places downtown. So the second restaurant in this sort of natural wine recommendations it's a pretty new restaurant. It's very hip, and it's called Chez Roux and Pettigrew.
Pettigrew is pretty easy to pronounce.
Oh yeah, I feel like that's a Harry Potter. It's a Harry Potter thing.
It is Peter Pettigrew, of course.
Yeah. So this place, it was all indoors. It's definitely again a more traditional sort of Quebec, very meat heavy, but all natural wine on the menu. And when you make your reservations, if you make them early enough, there's these incredible seats that are right at the window that look out over the street. We were seated one inside, but we were very envious of those folks who had those amazing seats. So you could probably request those if you requested early enough. But this is like a young chef from Quebec, and everybody's really excited about this place. And it was very vibrant, and again, it was like a sort of a less touristy place than some of the ones that were more downtown. But this one was super walkable to the old Quebec, just sort of right on the outskirts of that.
Ryan, did they serve poutine? Did you get any poutine while you were in Quebec?
I had so much poutine in Quebec.
Did you seriously?
Oh, I had breakfast poutine. I had night poutine. I had lunch poutine. I mean,
what are the differences among all these poutines?
Well, the breakfast poutine, they just put eggs in it essentially.
Sure. Well, they should do that at all times a day.
You can get breakfast poutine all times a day, and then the night poutine is just much heavier. Heavier, very heavy.
Night poutine's for when you're going to bed alone.
Yeah, I mean, Quebec City is not a late town.
No, that's true.
In fact, dinner wraps up here earlier than you would imagine. It's not like Montreal where people tend to eat at like 9. It's much more of like a 7:30 town.
Yeah, that is early.
So because we were there for quite a few nights and we had a car, we stayed in a little suburb directly across the water called La Vie. And, this it was sort of an interesting place because when Quebec City was founded, they built these 3 forts on that side of the river as another way to sort of protect Quebec City from, at that point, it was going to be American and invaders from the United States that were coming in, during or after the Civil War. In fact, there was like some sort of belief that at some point the U.S. was going to invade and that these forts were going to protect Quebec. Now that never happened, and we signed a treaty in like 1871, and the fort sort of never really got up and operational. Mm-hmm. But they kept one of the forts and they turned it into a national park. And you can go visit this, and it's a pretty cool fort. I mean, it definitely feels really secure. It's there are multiple walls or walls like buried into the side of this hill. But I really loved they had this bridge to get into the fort that was actually set up on a track, and it was manually rolled by 2 men would have to sort of crank the bridge to go in and out. And
so it's like a train track?
It's like set on a train track. It's like a rolling bridge that's sort of set on this train track. And, the guide and I were talking, and apparently it doesn't work anymore. Like it won't go back and forth anymore because nobody knows how to repair it. It was state of the art at the time, and now there's just nobody who works in that kind of heavy duty bridge, old school bridge maintenance.
Retrieval track engineer. That sounds like a great, I feel like an MIT undergrad could really dig into this problem.
Yeah, it is. It seems like something that could be fixed, but they've got a lot of cool photos and stuff of how the bridge works. And it was probably my favorite part of the whole little fort. And you have great views of Quebec City from the top, and in theory you can even see New York State from the top of it, but I'm skeptical of that.
And just so I'm clear, this rolling bridge, given that it's been stuck for so long, have they just been trapped inside for hundreds of years?
Luckily, it trapped open.
Oh, thank God. Thank our lucky stars.
Yeah, or else.
And is it over a moat?
It was over a moat. Yeah. Now it's all dry, but it could have been a moat. And you can go, you walk down into sort of the basement of the fort, and you can see where people would have been stationed with their little guns and have the little ice, very small openings. So if folks had jumped into that moat from on top, they would not have been alive very long.
Well, let me ask you, do you know whether the moat actually held water? Because there are dry moats.
I do not. So these forts never went into full operation because by the time they were finished, they had signed the treaty and they no longer needed them. And weirdly enough, they built over the other two, so they were really lucky to have this one survive, so they could sort of turn it into this park.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask you to take a little homework and find out whether that moat was meant to be wet or dry, and we can come back to it as a recalculating.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Great, because I have spent some time at in the south of France at a chateau called the Chateau de Tufu, and it's a 12th century chateau, and they have a wide moat with a bridge over it, and the moat is dry, so you can actually go down into the creepy cellar of this old chateau, and you can actually enter the moat. And some landowners would actually keep, stray pigs down in the moat, and they just throw all their leftovers and junk down there, and they just live in the moat.
You cannot get into this moat, unfortunately, but it is at this point very dry.
All right. Well, I think we've got more moat talk in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a whole episode. The great moats of the Americas.
That might be a one shot deal. Well, I think there's a moat at Disney World.
I'm sure there is.
Cinderella's Castle. It's got a big bridge.
So another place that we went because we had a car is actually north of the city, about 15 minutes, and it's a massive park built around these falls called the Mount Morency Falls. Did you have a chance to see that when you were in town?
No, I remember though. This is a pretty popular destination right outside Quebec City, right?
Yeah, this is definitely pretty popular, and they've built a big suspension bridge, so you can kind of walk over the suspension bridge to see the falls. But they've additionally built like a walkway down the side of this mountain. That's like a wood steps, and you can actually walk and see it from the front angle all the way down. So it's a really cool, and these are actually taller than Niagara Falls. They're not nearly as wide, but they're very, very tall. So you get to the suspension bridge is a great way to sort of walk over them, to get a sense of how tall they are. And then you can sort of walk all the way around the other way. And from there, walk down this sort of kind of interesting these wood steps, and get a lot of great pictures and angles.
Wait, what's so interesting about the wood?
I mean, some of the families were a little trepidatious when they were walking on it. It seems safe enough.
Is there a railing?
Yeah, there's a railing.
Hey, you got a railing. Slippery wood. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, what are you gonna do? So we went to Montreal. And we were there for about a week, and we stayed in Little Burgundy. And Little Burgundy is, it is now a hipster neighborhood, but it was a historically black neighborhood in Montreal, which is actually where Joe Beef is. And, we talked about Joe Beef at length on the first Montreal episode, but, one of the more exciting places to eat in Montreal. They were one of the first of the fancy restaurants on that road, and now there's like 5 or 6 that are sort of right there. That really sort of make Little Burgundy have this real kind of nightlife scene going on. One of my go-to places, because we were working during the day while we were in Montreal, was September Cafe, and this is it used to be a surf shop. So there are surfboards hanging around, and the proprietor still makes custom surfboards. But because the cafe is such a success, it's no longer sort of happening there at the shop. But really fantastic, in Little Burgundy, if you're out walking around that neighborhood and, before you're going to Joe Beef or whatever, check out September Cafe. They had great coffee, great breakfast, really great like local coffee shop vibe. Tim Hortons, I kind of got addicted to while I was there. So
really?
It was good.
Oh, I didn't really. Their answer to kind of our Dunkin' Donuts.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's certainly in Quebec City because it didn't have a hipster coffee shop scene. But
I'm surprised by that. It seems like they should have at least one coffee shop fit for a Bushwick visitor.
It's not that young of a town, but then so to be in Montreal, you could walk right to this place. It was great to have it there.
And did you take a silly picture pretending like you were riding a surfboard?
No, they were just implementing the Quebec vaccine dining out mandate.
I see.
So everybody was in a very serious mood. Going in and out of restaurants was like, you have to show your passport and everything, your vaccine passport. And as an American, that just means your CDC card, essentially. So make sure you bring that with you. You need it across the border, but you need it also to eat out.
And do they take like any of the digital passport things, or you have to bring your physical?
I had a picture of my CDC card, and that worked.
Cool.
Yeah, so I think that should work for folks. And we go into a lot of restaurants in the first Montreal episode, so I want to only touch on one other place. One of the places that I want to flag is Vin Mon Lapin, and this is in Little Italy, part of Montreal, where a lot is happening. Like a lot of the restaurants, a lot of the newer places are sort of popping up there, and this is a very Quebec. So it's very meat heavy, farm to table, great natural wine, super romantic casuals, like super romantic spot. And sort of like out of the way of a lot of the other sort of trendy restaurants in the city. So, it definitely takes like 20 minutes to get out there because you're going way past, you're going past Mount Royal, sort of out of the center city into Little Italy. But you'll notice that there's a bunch of restaurants that are popping up out there. And this, I think, is the one to check out. And, definitely a big reservation place.
Now, Ryan, one thing that you and I often try to search out in cities is if the World's Fair, right? Any of these cities that hosted the World's Fair, the site always has some sort of like curious thing left behind. Like in Chicago, you can see remnants of it. In Queens, New York, you've got the stuff that the whole park and the giant globe, they built all this infrastructure out for these World's Fairs. And I know Montreal hosted a World's Fair. So I'm wondering, did you make it to see the remains?
Yeah, so they hosted the World's Fair in 1967. And there are a couple really cool things left from the World's Fair. The one that I think is a real highlight is this really kooky residential building called Habitat 67.
Ooh, that sounds like a true crime podcast.
It does. I mean, certainly there's some crimes that have happened here, but this is like it's really this really epic, brutalist residential neighborhood. And the idea, it was, similar to some of the buildings we've talked about before, where, people would live there and everything would be sort of available to them inside of the building. But it's really just become sort of a co-op. But it looks like someone designed it by just stacking a bunch of Legos together in sort of arbitrary ways. Like it sort of defies logic that it could still be standing after all these years. But it's really a fantastic piece of architecture. And one of the things that surprised me about it is I'd seen pictures when I was walking there. I'd seen all these pictures of it, and I expected it to be sort of not as wide as it was, but it's actually, very, very wide. And you can't get a good, any picture you take is going to be from like a very specific angle. And you can really only see the entirety of the building if you're on the other side of the river. So it is truly fantastic. And they offer tours. I unfortunately made my tour. I unfortunately tried to get in too close to the tour dates. But if you you're going into Montreal well in advance, there are definitely limited tours available. You can get better view of the property, because if not, it's private residence, so you're going to be outside. But even if you don't have a ticket to get in, it is definitely worth seeing. And a lot of folks will park near there to go surfing and to do all sorts of things in the water. So it's a very active, sort of exciting environment too when you're walking by.
And you posted to your Instagram, and we should throw them on the Out of Office podcast Instagram, which is of course at OOO podcast. Some pictures of this building, and we're super memorable and cool. I can't say I've ever seen a building quite like it. I really love the like Lego, very odd structure to it all. Yeah, and they claim that have even done early models of it using just Legos. So really? You can imagine that when you see it. Oh yeah, for sure.
And then another cool thing, not too far from that, walkable across this, pedestrian bridge, is the biosphere, which has been turned into a science museum. I didn't go into the museum. The biosphere is also located in this park that was constructed as part of the 1967 World's Fair, called the Parc Jean Drapeau. Drapeau? Is that right? It's a massive park, though. You can't miss it. And
Drapeau, is that right?
And it contains other remnants of like a sculpture garden and other remnants of sort of the World's Fair. A lot of trails, a lot of biking. And there's a metro stop that will take you right there. I actually ended up walking, and I walked through all the way from Little Burgundy, where we were staying, through this really interesting, we love when they take old pieces of urban architecture and turn them into parks. Mm-hmm. They've done something like this here at the Lachine Canal National Park. And essentially Montreal was a canal city. It still is a big shipping town. And they had all these sort of, at the time, they were really state-of-the-art canals and systems of getting making the water go multiple ways. And they've turned this one into like a completely accessible, clean park. And I actually was able to walk nonstop without having to cross a road with a car for like an hour.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Up the canal, up through Habitat 67, and up into the sea sphere, the biosphere.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah, so that was really cool, and a great day of sort of exploring the scene.
And how do you find the metro?
I thought the metro was very clean. It was nice. It was fast.
Is it easy to navigate?
It's easy enough. I didn't take it as many times as I probably could have, but I did when I got to the park after a long day of walking in the heat. I did take it back home, and I figured it out myself. I was pretty proud. But warning, they do sell. Make sure you keep your Metro card, because they charge you $6 if you get a new one. Good tip. Yeah, exactly. And then I guess the last thing that I'll mention from this trip was it's something that is actually playing right now, or happening right now, is I love immersive experiences.
Absolutely.
So there is for
all I know, you didn't actually go to Quebec City and Montreal. You just went to some immersive Montreal experience in New York.
Well, there's this organization called FI that has put together a lot of sort of weird, virtual reality, augmented reality experiences. And they have one playing right now, and it's actually playing until the end of November in Montreal. And it's based on the International Space Station. And what they've done is they have filmed, many, many hours of footage at the International Space Station and around it. And you put on this glasses, VR glasses and headset, mm-hmm. and you can't see or hear anything. And they put you into a dark room with a lot of other people in the same headset who can't see anything. And you explore the 3D space of the space station as if you were there. And the people around you, you can see them in the VR space, but they are like, they're just sort of cutouts of themselves. You really can't, obviously you can't see who they are. They are, but they exist in the space with you. Does that make sense? So
I don't really understand it, honestly.
Okay, so you're in a physical room,
I'm in a physical room, and I put on my glasses and I put on my headset.
Right, exactly. And I can see you as an avatar of you,
Okay. Oh yeah. So it's almost like a video conferencing system. Yeah,
except we're all in the same room together.
And does it look like me?
No, it looks like a ghost of you, or Oh
God, are you threatening me?
It's like a ghost, or like your aura or something. But
sure,
it doesn't really work, because I still kind of bumped into people, and you bump into walls. But it is like one of the I've never been in a free floating VR experience. Yeah. Before, where you can walk more than a foot. Did you
accidentally steal a guy's wallet? It doesn't really work.
No, if you had taken your mask off, you'd be a superhero, because nobody can see anything. And the whole time they're they're showing you how the International Space Station works, and you can kind of explore but you can't really touch things. It is successful to the point that this technology will let you be, but it doesn't, it's not really wowing. So,
yeah, it's one of these things where I feel like everyone always feels like virtual reality is like just about to be normal, but like it's still, you go to one of these things or you try out one of the headsets and it still feels like it's like 10 years away from being decent.
Yeah. But once you can kind of taste what it's going to be like when they finally get over that hump, which is now like the cheap material, like the, shoddy headsets and stuff. I think that in a perfect world, it would be like they're getting there. It's certainly better than it was 5 years ago.
Sure. All right. Well, faint praise, but I think they're going to break through in Montreal.
I think they will. These folks are trying to do all sorts of interesting things. So
just to wrap it up, it sounds like you had quite the adventure up in Quebec City and Montreal. I think it's very cool that you took an adventure where you combined, a new place, Quebec City, which I obviously had whetted your appetite for, and a place that you were familiar with and could find new exciting adventures.
Yeah, it's great to return to Montreal. It was one of my last trips before the end times, and it was. I think it was nice to kind of go to Canada as my first foray back in international travel. And Canada's open and looking for tourists. So folks should head up. These are both great like weekend trips.
Fantastic. Well, Ryan, with that, I think it's time for the last stop.
The last stop.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the last stop on this train. Everyone, please leave the train.
All right, Ryan, we're here in the last stop. This is the last segment of the show. It's the final segment of the show. It's why it's called the last stop. That's where the name derives from. And it's my favorite segment. It's your favorite segment. It's popularly known as the people segment. And it's where we each take a moment, you and I each take a moment to share a piece of ourselves. It could be anything that we've read, we've eaten, perhaps we've dreamt it or we smelt it. Anything qualifies as long as it fed the spirit of wanderlust within us, even during the workaday week. So, Ryan, I'm going to ask you, as I ask you every episode, do you have a last stop this week?
I do. So I have been reading Celeste Ning's novel Little Fires Everywhere. Have you read this?
I haven't read it, but I am familiar with it from write-ups about it.
So it takes place in this planned community in Ohio called Shaker Heights. And, I'm like really interested in old school planned communities, usually because they're failures,
I think that maybe they're all failures. I can't think of one that's on the map that I'm going, that one was successful.
Yeah. Disney Celebration, like another one that's like a famous sort of failure.
Yeah. It's funny you say that. I was just thinking about that. Did that one fail?
I think it kind of, it's like, no, who wants to live there? Have you ever heard anybody say like, oh, what a great place to live? I always hear like, it's always on like a weird podcast as like not usually as a success.
Yeah, the podcast world just frickin' loves planned community stories.
Well, we are giving you a planned community story here because Little Fires Everywhere takes place in Shaker Heights, which is this planned community. And it just sounds like a really bizarre place. And upon further reading, a full 75% of the houses in this community are in the National Register of Historic Places. Isn't that wild?
Yes. Crazy.
Yeah. So I don't know that I've ever been to Celebration, and I definitely haven't been to Shaker Heights. But I would be really interested to go and take a tour of one of these places and sort of understand what 100 years of just like the most brutal zoning laws ever have created in these quote unquote like
it's the sort of places like they basically want. Well, I know Disney Celebration like it has a real Stepford sort of like the idea is that all the lawn should be, exactly this green, exactly this high. Your flower box needs to be exactly this in bloom. It's
you can only plant flowers, never vegetables. You can only have your cans out a certain, so it's an entirely planned community, and it's been around for a really long time. And it seems to be, they had envisioned it as a garden city. And I wonder how it all turns out. I know there's a TV series of this, of Little Fires Everywhere. So that'll probably be my next foray into this community. But I have to tell you, next time I'm in Ohio, which happens occasionally, I might jump out there and sort of get a look at this place, because it would really be sort of like driving into like a neighborhood that hasn't changed in 50 years.
Creepy.
So yes, and the novel itself is really is pretty compelling, and I can tell that it would make a good TV show. So,
and what's the general outline of the plot?
It's about this family that has lived in this community for multiple generations, and they have a tenant of this young mother and her daughter who move in to one of their rental properties, and she changes their lives forever.
Oh. I'm going on Amazon right now.
It's a good read. It's a good read. So I've been in Shaker Heights for the last week and a half. What have you been up to?
Well, that's not the way you ask.
Well, what is your last stop, Kieran?
Oh, thank you so much. We're both recommending pieces to read. And this one is a great article in the New Yorker. It's available on the New Yorker's website. It's by a journalist named Sam Knight. And it's all about the National Trust in England. It was featured in the print edition on August 23rd, and it's available on the website too. And the title of the piece is Britain's Idyllic Country Houses Reveal a Darker History. And, for what it's worth, I did try to have Sam Knight onto the podcast, was not able to make the interview work this time around, but I so loved this article. I sure am hoping that sometime in the future we could have him. And what he spotlights in here is, it's going to sound very familiar to a lot of Americans who are experiencing America's questioning of our history and how it's represented today, because he digs into a charitable foundation called the National Trust. Ryan, are you familiar with the National Trust?
Not in Britain. So they've backed away from their duty on this.
You get the sense that these administrators didn't expect the amount of acrimony because, to them, this is history of England. This is history of the empire. This is history of families involved with slavery. I mean, history is history. And they have been shocked. They rely on donations. They rely on volunteers to keep this organization going. And so by creating controversy, I think that they're afraid of losing their standing and their reputation with the British people. And so they are backing down. But, I think you and I would both agree. There's been a lot of really productive conversations happening in this vein in the U.S. I know, for example, I've read a lot in the last year about people comparing, how Mount Vernon represents slavery versus how Monticello represents slavery. And I remember when I went to Monticello, incredibly impressed by how forthright the tour guides were in their specialized tours to explore the lives of slaves that Jefferson kept. And, it feels like a real honest accounting of that history. And it feels like England needs to go through the same thing.
But meanwhile, you go to the Hermitage, Andrew Jackson's home, and the guide there said, look, I know a lot of people have been talking about slavery lately. So he totally downplayed Jackson's connection to slavery.
Well, and you could go through that whole house tour. And, there's there's the foundations of one preserved slave cabin in the back.
Right.
And unless you search out, I think there's that. And then there's the grave of one of his slaves that's actually, close to the Jackson's grave. So they can't overlook it, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly, that might be an interesting topic for us to dive into. It's what I was hoping we could talk to Sam Knight about, and maybe there'll be a follow-up, or maybe we'll find some time in the future.
Yeah, and we were recording this episode just a couple weeks after the Robert E. Lee statue was removed.
Fantastic story.
Yeah, removed from Monument Avenue in Richmond. So it was.
And the American Museum of Natural History is working on taking down the Theodore Roosevelt statue.
Well, that's got to go.
It's got to go. It's pretty bad.
There's a much nicer Teddy sculpture right inside.
Absolutely, which you and I worked on. It's revealing to the public.
Yeah. So that get your picture taken with that one.
Yeah, so we're glad to see the racist one go. Theodore Roosevelt's a complicated character, but that statue is clearly racist.
Yes, and it needs to go.
Now, Ryan, what do you want to talk about next episode?
I think next episode, it's time to finish up our Olmsted series and talk about some of the greatest works of Olmsted and, where to visit and where to see his work.
Absolutely. Our the close of our Olmsted series. And boy, you must be darn excited.
I'm a huge Olmsted fan, so it's going to be fun to talk through some of our favorite places. So, folks should look forward to that.
All right. I'll see you in the park.
Yeah. Well, until then, I'm Ryan Davis.
And I'm Kiernan Schmidt.
And this is Out of Office, a travel podcast.
The seat taken. Ryan, how is your French speaking up in Quebec?
It was so embarrassing. I actually answered in Spanish a couple times.
Oh,